Hello and welcome to Case in Point. Great to be with you. I'm Joanne Joseph. Coming up on the programme.
The fact of a public inquiry is already humiliating to the President.
What the President is trying to do is to interfere in the processes of the Parliament.
It's just hours before the courts rule on whether President Cyril Ramaphosa has a right to halt the Parliamentary Impeachment Committee's work.
If I had to answer a person about playing God, then I would say, well, doctors play God every day. They keep a person carrying on living for long after when they should have left.
And DignitySA prepares to wage a court battle over medically assisted dying. Well, tomorrow the Western Cape High Court is expected to rule on whether President Cyril Ramaphosa has the right to temporarily stop Parliament's Section 89 impeachment inquiry stemming from the Phala Phala scandal. The President will take the findings of an independent panel report on review in September. But first, let's recap how he got to this point. Yolisa Njamela reminds us of the events of 4 years ago that led to this saga.
In February 2020, an undisclosed amount of foreign currency was stolen from President Cyril Ramaphosa's private Phala Phala wildlife farm in Limpopo. The cash, later indicated to be $580,000, was kept inside a sofa on the president's property. The issue came to light in 2022 when former state spy chief Arthur Fraser filed a complaint against President Ramaphosa at the Rosebank police station in Johannesburg. President Ramaphosa denied breaking any laws.
There's no dirty dollars, and I have said in various statements that this has been a result of the transaction as a farmer that I am, who has sold game.
Opposition parties rejected this explanation. The economic freedom fighters demanded the president's immediate resignation. The party also asked that the bodyguard whom Ramaphosa reported the stolen money to be also held to account.
How do you tell people of the protectors of your body that they must now leave the body to go and look for criminals that have stolen money from you? You are redirecting them and giving them an illegal instruction.
African Transformation Movement leader Vuyo Zungula has been one of President Cyril Ramaphosa's most vocal critics.
What message does it send to the nation when the allegations of money laundering, kidnapping, torturing, all happening in the president's farm, and the president refuses to take the nation into his confidence?
The Democratic Alliance pushed for an urgent ad hoc parliamentary committee to independently verify the origin of the foreign currency.
Existing exchange control regulations, for example, require that you receive prior permission before receiving payment in a foreign currency, and that you declare and sell back all foreign currency to an accredited dealer within 30 days of receipt.
In late 2022, an independent parliamentary panel investigated the matter. The panel concluded that Ramaphosa may have violated the constitution. However, the ANC used its majority in parliament to vote against the report, blocking an impeachment inquiry. Following a successful legal challenge by the EFF and ATM, the Constitutional Court ruled that Parliament's original refusal to investigate was unlawful. The court ordered the establishment of a formal Section 89 impeachment committee. In June this year, President Ramaphosa filed an urgent court application to halt the new impeachment inquiry. 6 years after the original break-in, the Phala Phala scandal remains a political battleground. Yolisa Njamela, Case in Point.
Well, the arguments the president's lawyer has presented to stop the impeachment committee's work are complicated. To help us unpack exactly what arguments are being made, our clinic attorney from the University of Johannesburg's Faculty of Law, Elton Hart, who joins us online, and legal expert DignitySA Phiri, who's with us in studio. Mr. Hart, I'm going to start with you. What exactly is the president asking the Western Cape High Court to do tomorrow morning?
From how I heard, arguments that was sort of structured by both sides, and specifically from the president's side, is that the president actually says, listen, yeah, I want this impeachment process to be stopped, interdicted, stopped, until such a time that we can actually deal with the review matter. And whatever the outcome of the review matter is, if I'm going to be unsuccessful in that review application of the independent panel report, allow me my constitutional rights to also take that on to higher courts and let the court then ventilate to say whether that panel report is reviewable or it should stand. And once that has been concluded, then you guys can say, if it means that I'm unsuccessful in all my applications up until the apex court, that I can then be brought before the parliament as per the directive or the order of the apex court to say that an impeachment committee should fully investigate this. But there is a lot of legal ramifications, and I think we'll unpack that later on. But that's in essence what the president is actually seeking, to actually get the process, and that will obviously play into prolonging the finalization of this matter.
I mean, the president is asking for just 2 months' grace anyway, because, of course, as you said, his review into that Section 89 report starts in September. Why do you think he feels the need to temporarily halt the committee's work?
But you understand now, the thing is, if the committee does its work and they come to a finding, maybe say towards December, let's say for argument's sake towards December, that he should be impeached. The other option, what he's exercising, is to say, I wait for the review. And if I'm not happy with the review application that's heard in September, I can then take it to a higher court to say, listen, yeah, I need this. And that might put us somewhere in 2027, and then it buys him time. And that is what some people could argue is like, this is clearly just a delay tactic by the president and not purely based on what it is. Because if you're saying that you want to stop the entire process, it's like you're technically asking the High Court to overrule the apex court of this country, and that, as lawyers, we know that cannot happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, Mr. Phiri, how strong do you believe Wim Trengove's argument is that the Section 89 panel asked the wrong question in exercising its duties and eventually, eventually finding that the president had a case to answer on the face of it?
Well, that argument was submitted by the president to illustrate that he's got a prima facie right to protect, because ultimately the test that he needed to show had 5 elements, being an urgent interdict application. So that argument was submitted to make the case that the Section 89 panel report was hopelessly wrong from a legal perspective, and the president should then not be subjected to an impeachment process which stems from a hopelessly wrong panel report. And, the question then around did they answer the right question stems around the level at which they assessed the evidence. Yeah. The panel said that they construed it to mean as prima facie, and the president says a lot more was required, and that should have been sufficient evidence.
I'm looking at Wim Trengove's description of the Section 89 panel. He says they aggregated a whole mishmash of information, everything from rumours to newspaper articles to hearsay, to come up with the finding that the president had a case to answer without actually interviewing the president. He insisted that none of that information was tested using the standards that one would use in a court of law to actually prove an argument. Is that a fair summary of what happened during that noble process?
Well, I mean, the process in itself actually created an outcome of that nature, because the first step in the process was the ATM submitting a motion, which then had to meet a prima facie threshold with the Speaker. But then the next stage of the panel was constrained with respect to only accepting affidavits and statements from members of Parliament. They did not have the ability to cross-examine or subpoena witnesses. So that is a feature of the process in itself, and does not, in my view, invalidate what that panel did, because that's really all that they had to work with by virtue of this impeachment mechanism.
Let me bring you back in here, Mr. Hart. I mean, those opposing this court action seem divided over the president's motives. I think you've suggested one to us that some people are using, which is that he's playing for time. Some of them are surmising in court that this is related to the possible humiliation of being held to account in front of the entire country. Others say any possible impeachment would rob him of his benefits. What do you think his main motivation is here for fighting this?
Now, obviously, we know that if you are a sitting president and you are removed or impeached in a way that is not in line with the, actually your term runs out, you might lose your benefits. But when one looks at humiliation and I think reputational damage, that was the two things that they were playing with. I cannot, for me, for the life of it, I cannot see that it's irreparable harm. Because although, yeah, there is this process that the president is subjected to and the reputational damage that he might suffer short term. If he says that I'm good, I'm a farmer, it was a business transaction, and there's nothing untoward, just think how strong he would come out if everything goes according to what he's saying, that he's a farmer and it was a genuine transaction. It will just give him more credibility in the eyes of South Africans. So instead of having a reputational damage, it can actually be a reputational booster. So, and then he's looking at now the inconvenience that it brings to it. But obviously, as a president, you are constantly under public scrutiny. You need to be accountable, you need to be open, and you need to conduct you in a way that's in line with our Constitution. So that's why the Constitution is written in a way that it's written, that we can hold people accountable for certain actions when it comes to certain behavior. So that's how I see it. And I think for me, yes, they made arguments, but I don't think it's good enough arguments that would suggest that he would get an interdict to stop this process.
Well, I think we should take a short break here. Coming up after the break, we look into the arguments of the four parties opposing the president's court action. We'll fill you in just a moment. Welcome back to Case in Point. We're analysing the President's bid to pause the Impeachment Committee's work in Parliament with legal analysts Retumitse Phiri and Elton Hart. Impeachment Committee Chair Makashila Gane, the EFF, the MK Party and the ATM are opposing the President's application. And Mr. Phiri, that's probably a very good place to start. Interesting that we have these four entities going head-to-head with the President over this. But National Assembly Speaker Thokoza isn't opposing the application. Should she have stood with the Impeachment Committee Chair on this matter?
I think absolutely she should have stood with the Impeachment Committee Chair. And to my mind, her actions in sort of putting her head in the sand is almost a bit of an affront to what the Constitution requires of her office, as well as what the Constitutional Court effectively ordered. So she should have given effect to the order of the Constitutional Court in its judgment, but she left it to the committee as opposed to Parliament as the institution itself. So I think that's not the correct decision on the part of the Speaker of Parliament.
I mean, hasn't she started the process anyway by actually getting the committee together, you know, getting the members elected, having them look at their terms of reference, you know, whether or not she's doing that on paper, opposing this application that is on paper, isn't she actively involved in the process of getting the impeachment inquiry going?
Well, I think you'd have to sort of assess what the Constitution requires when there are constitutional obligations to be given effect to. And it's quite clear that whenever there's a question of constitutional obligations, those are meant to be given effect to forthwith. So you can't just sit and say, well, I'm leaving it to a committee when Parliament, in fact, is obliged to give effect to its powers to hold the executive accountable. So for me in this, she's weakened the force of giving effect to her constitutional obligations.
Mr. Hart, I saw you out of the corner of my eye there nodding vigorously when I asked that question. What is your stance on Togodidisa's action or lack of action on this issue?
No, I think my colleague has actually gave a proper metaphor. She's actually sticking her head into the sand. And for me, the problem is her to say that I'm just going to abide. And the problematic part for me is the Constitutional Court had to actually make an order that dictates to her, listen here, this committee needs to start now. Because if that order was not there, she was not going to do it. So for me, it's again, I pick up the notion of towing the party line. And that is where members of parliament should clearly make sure that when they have a constitutional duty, that they uphold the constitution first before they start towing party lines, because that has been the start of why we are here, where we are having this review application. And for me, I think she is the head of the institution, Parliament. Whether you like what is happening or not, you need to take a stance and you need to make sure that Parliament is properly represented, and your fiduciary duty that you hold as the head of this institution, you need to always act in the best interest of that institution and not who actually sent you there.
Mr. Phiri, let me bring you in here on the issue of the terms of reference that this impeachment committee is working on and will soon finesse. One of the big issues that the committee has to decide on is whether it's going to call the president to testify, whether he will testify in person, whether he will do it through a representative. I don't know what other options there may be on the table in terms of that. What do you understand to be the terms of reference in terms of whether he's expected to be there in person or not? An answer.
I mean, I understand that the terms are still in development, and certainly that point is still a point for debate. But, as far as I'm concerned, we cannot pretend to hold the president accountable. We actually have to really hold him accountable. And, his version must be subject to scrutiny. And he must say what he understands to be the case, and the public must see him. I don't believe we could do justice to holding the president accountable, and certainly that should not be the precedent to set, that the next time we have a president who's potentially in an impeachment process, they can get away with submitting statements via their lawyers.
Mr. Elton Hart, do you agree with that? And I want to ask this because it is being put forward here that that is a possibility that certain MPs on that committee are going to vote for him to appear via a proxy, a lawyer possibly.
No, indeed, and that's my problem, that I say that you have MPs that will come there because they are sent by a certain political organization. They would come there and actually now vote just simply by saying, we're going to make sure that we would protect the president at whatever cost it may be to the South African public. And for me, that is problematic because we say we've got a constitution and the constitution requires a president to act in a certain way. We've got parliament and there's rules of parliament that you MPs have come up with. That is how we're going to run this institution. And if we're going to now treat certain individuals to in a certain way and treat the president as if he is somebody that's special. Yes, he's the president, but it doesn't mean he is free from public scrutiny, and specifically when we look at the Constitution and how he's being treated, because in our Constitution it says everybody's equal before the law. So if it means that he has to come there and present himself, I think that should be. And members of parliament should know what is their constitutional duties. It's not party duties, it's duties towards parliament, which is drawn from the Constitution.
Mr. Phiri, I want to ask you about some of the contents of this impeachment committee, what they're likely to look at. The ANC seems to have an appetite to revisit the SARS, the Reserve Bank, the Public Protector, the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence reports that found the president had done nothing wrong. They haven't mentioned the IPID report as far as I've seen. I mean, is that something that they should do as a matter of evidence gathering?
Well, I think the reports in and of themselves are opinions in this kind of proceedings. What will have more solid evidentiary weight is the actual evidence that underpinned the report. So the committee will be able to gather the similar and same type of evidence that was gathered by each of these bodies in a similar fashion in accordance with their powers as eventually crafted in the terms of reference. And they will then be able to make their own assessment regarding the potential infringements of the law in those various instances. So it will be interesting if the committee's report finds in a different fashion, for instance, from the Public Protector or the SARB. So I think that will be an interesting outcome because it would be based off the same evidence that each of those bodies would have had themselves.
Yeah. Mr. Hart, do you have the sense that the political shadow of the GNU is hanging over this? I mean, we're trying to have a legal conversation here, as Parliament should, about this. But will the politics here eventually supersede the legal dynamics, especially if in the long run this is put to a parliamentary vote in the same National Assembly that voted this issue down a few years ago?
No, indeed, and obviously people might say, no, it's not going to happen. Because remember, I would not want to mention this political party, but they normally wear blue regalia. They are somewhere strong in the Western Cape. And they had a certain sentiment to say that the president must be held accountable, and their leader at that time, I still remember it vividly, how he jumped up and had this grandstanding moment to say how the president should be held accountable. And then suddenly, when they actually moved into the GNU, suddenly that conversation sort of half died down. It sort of half mellowed down. So, and I think as much as we're going to have a situation where evidence will be led and there will be rigorous debate, we still talk about mathematics here, the numbers. If you look at how the impeachment committee is sort of half constituted, it might still come down to certain types of probing sort of have to be sort of half killed in its infancy, and then eventually it will go back to the bigger number of parliament to say, yes, but this committee found, and then they voted, and this is the things, and then they can again vote it down using the GNU power now, because now they don't have just a close to majority, they have an outright majority having these other things. And then we also have a certain party with Green that is also now in the GNU, and I have heard already that they also is not going to remove a sitting president. So you can already see them hinting at how they're going to vote if it gets to that point.
A very last quick answer from you here, please, Mr. Phiri. They need to choose a credible evidence leader. Any idea who might lead this commission?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we've seen the names and we've seen some opposition to some of the names. Some of the council are said to potentially have been working with the president or may have an axe to grind with the president. I think what's important is that it is someone who's credible, who's got the standing, and who can actually challenge and direct these proceedings in a way that they'll actually stand whatever review tests that may come subsequently.
Well, thank you both for your insights into the story. It's an exciting one, certainly. Elton Hart and Rethumitsa Phiri, thanking you so much for your insights into the story as we wait for this judgment tomorrow. Still to come on Case in Point, DignitySA fights for the right to a medically assisted death for terminally ill patients. We'll explore this issue after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Since 2011, advocacy organisation DignitySA has been advocating for end-of-life choices, which include the decriminalisation of medical assistance in dying or MAID for terminally ill patients. In April this year, the organisation filed a constitutional court challenge in the North Gauteng High Court, or rather constitutional challenge, for the courts to declare the blanket ban on medical assistance in dying unconstitutional. As campaigners prepare for this landmark case in the next 2 months, Mfundo Msomi caught up with the Eastern Cape mother of one of the patients who died before his wish for medically assisted dying was realised.
South Africa's law prohibits medical practitioners or family members from assisting terminally ill patients from ending their lives. But DignitySA believes that this violates the constitutional right to human dignity. Pres.Ramaphosa says she witnessed her son, Pres.Ramaphosa, die in 2009 whilst in pursuit of assistance to end his life due to the pain he suffered from his terminal illness.
He was diagnosed with a disease at the age of 1, incurable disease named neurofibromatosis type 1. He had a brain tumour at the age of 7, and he had to go to Cape Town to have that removed. And while he was recovering from the op for the brain tumour, they then found that he had blockages to both his kidneys. It's called stenosis.
Because the option of assisted dying is illegal in South Africa, Craig explored options abroad where it's allowed.
He came and he said he's found his peace. And we said, well, what is that peace, Craig? No, that peace is going to Switzerland for dignified death. And we were told you are not in any way to assist him, not pay for his airfare, nothing, because you will be arrested if you come back into this country.
In 2015, terminally ill advocate Robert Stransham-Ford applied to the North Gauteng High Court for an order to have medically assisted dying. The court ruled in his favor, but he died just hours before the judgment was handed down. The following year, the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned the ruling on procedural and technical grounds. Pres.Ramaphosa hopes that this time around, DignitySA's application will succeed. A call also advocated by the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
People who are terminally ill should have the option of dignified and compassionate assisted dying alongside the wonderful palliative care that already exists.
Despite opposition to their calls, Pres.Ramaphosa says assisted dying serves as a bridge between helplessness and dignity.
If I had to answer a person about playing God, then I would say, well, doctors play God every day. They keep a person carrying on living for long after when they should have left.
The Department of Health argue, among others, that medically assisted dying is a violation of the medical profession's ethical codes and the sanctity of life. The Department of Justice and the National Director of Public Prosecutions have announced that they will not oppose the upcoming court challenge. If DignitySA's case succeeds, the court will likely order Parliament to draft legislation within 24 months. Mfundo Msomi, Case in Point.
Well, this case has been in the courts before, being approved, then overturned on a technicality. But this week, the organisation announced that the Justice Department, especially the NDPP, was no longer going to oppose its application. The Health Department and some related entities will, however, continue to oppose DignitySA's stance in court. Joining us to explain their views on this are Executive Director of DignitySA, Professor Joseph Raimondo. He's joining us from Cape Town. A University of Cape Town Professor of Family Medicine and Palliative Care, Liz Gwither. She actually joins us from Scotland. And medical lawyer Sanelisiwe Mbata, who is with us in studio this evening. Welcome to all of you. Ms. Mbata, let me kick it off with you. What does the law currently prescribe about medically assisted dying?
Yeah, good evening to yourself as well as your viewers at home. Obviously, it's still illegal in the country because it does amount to culpable homicide / murder, which is part of common law. So, in simple, it's illegal.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you've put it very plainly indeed. Professor Raimondo, you're specifically asking the courts to legalise medical assistance in dying or MAID. What does that actually mean in practice?
So, in practice, what it means is that we're asking that a person that has a terminal or irremediable condition that's causing them intolerable suffering, and that they meet strict eligibility criteria, such as being mentally competent, they need to be able to make a voluntary request. People that meet those criteria should be able to have medical assistance in dying, where a medical professional can assist them to end their lives without that being illegal.
What would be the method of assisted dying?
So ultimately, that would be up to Parliament to legislate, but there are broadly two categories. One is what we call physician-assisted medical assistance in dying, where the doctor either gives the person an injection or provides the substance which ends their life, or where the other option is where the patient themselves, the doctor provides the means, but the person themselves, say, drinks a cocktail, for instance, and that ends their life, which would previously be called medically assisted suicide.
Right. If the court grants your application, what sort of process do you imagine an individual would have to go through to secure legal permission to end their lives?
So I think we, as Dignity South Africa, envision a very careful process to make sure that those eligibility criteria that I've just described are met, and that there are a whole other set of safeguards. Ultimately, it'll be up to Parliament to decide, but we have our own ideas how that could happen to be done safely in South Africa, because we recognize South Africa is a unique case. There are deep problems that I'm sure Prof. Wither will allude to. We have very low penetrance of palliative care, with only about 18% of people in South Africa having access to palliative care. We recognize without good access to palliative care, it's not really a choice. If you don't have good pain control, if you don't have access to home-based care, choosing assisted dying isn't really a choice. It just reflects a lack of good care. So we recognize all of these things, and so in the system we formulate, it would first start small and be accessible through tertiary or secondary hospitals or private hospitals with similar capability that can already provide palliative care, to ensure that the patients that are seeking it are first offered palliative care. And any bill that does get promoted needs to be accompanied with a huge investment in palliative care to expand that. So we see these two things as deeply interlinked. As soon as our society starts to grapple with end-of-life issues like this, I think everyone wins and people have compassionate choices near the end of their life.
Prof. Wither, is this a reasonable argument that Professor Raimondo puts forward?
So, no, I don't believe it's a reasonable argument. Really, palliative care neither hastens nor postpones death. So it will not support euthanasia. And we have a newly formed association in South Africa called Compassion SA to promote palliative care and to prevent euthanasia, because we believe that the response to suffering should be good holistic care, not just the medical care, the physical care, but also the emotional and existential care. And we do believe that under those cases, euthanasia is unnecessary and extreme. And if we look at medical associations, the World Medical Association, the South African, the Health Professions Council of South Africa, the British Medical Association, the doctors who are providing care towards the end of life with people with terminal illnesses, they all contend that this should not be part of medical practice. And if in any case society decides that assisted dying should then become legal, it should not ever be doctors who provide this. That's not a form of treatment and not a form of compassionate care. We really believe that it's important to express the value of each individual and not to give them messages that they are lesser and worth less than people who are fit and young and able-bodied. We need to make sure that we maintain and restore their dignity and provide them messages of the value that they are to society. And we need to also support families, because a lot of concern with long-term illness and serious illness is with the amount of care that a person does need. So we're very encouraged by the fact that the National Department of Health will be approving the updated national policy for palliative care with a budget to be able to ensure that more people throughout South Africa have access to this care.
Right. Ms. Mbata, let me bring you back in here because, you know, you've been a theatre nurse and you've now moved into the legal field, so you straddle both disciplines very, very widely. And tell me, I've listened to what both of our guests have to say. The first thing I want to ask you about is quality of life. Is that going to be an issue that will be raised in court, do you imagine?
Okay, first of all, I must give a disclaimer. The matter is before court,
right?
So it's sub judice.
Okay.
As a lawyer, ethically speaking, I may not make comment on that. I can only speak about the right, of which obviously the court will have to look at that.
Yes.
You know, but the entire matter, I cannot comment on it, unfortunately. I'm sorry. As you've said, I've got both worlds, yes. You know, I've lived both worlds. For me, I have a different view, obviously, of euthanasia. I completely do not see any court making any decision, right, which will literally turn over the right to life, which has already been decided by the Constitutional Court, yes. In S versus Makwanyane.
Right.
You know, with euthanasia, it affects quite a bit of constitutional rights, right, which are under the Bill of Rights. The right to life, human dignity, the right to personal integrity, you know, equality. So if you ask me for my personal view, I really I do not think it should be legalized.
So this is an interesting question, because part of what Professor Gwither has said talks to finding value in the life of somebody who is still towards the end of their life, may not be living a great quality of life, but is still valued by that society. And I wonder whether that person's choice to either live or die should supersede what Professor Gwither has suggests is a very important thing.
I mean, if we can just literally discuss it at that low level, is the fact that somebody is unwell and they go to the hospital. So if the intention was for them to die, then why do you bring them to the hospital? If then their condition then worsens, now you decide, okay, no, this person mustn't live. You see, so I have difficulty in that. So which means then a person's life must be dependent on someone, you know, because literally it's like, okay, I want Sane to leave, right? If she gets this medical assistance, but if then the medical assistant doesn't work, then okay, Sane must die.
Isn't that a reality in our country, though? And I take Professor Gwither's point that palliative care and investing in palliative care in the country is such an important thing. And we will be getting a bill that deals specifically with that. But we are notoriously bad at implementing legislation in this country. So we could have a wonderful bill that never actually, from a practical point of view, is implemented. I mean, is there an argument to be made that...
no, obviously, you know, we are dealing with a very contentious issue. I mean, it involves law, it involves constitutional, it involves medicine, jurisprudence. So it is a very contentious issue. But I do not think anyone can have a prerogative to be able to decide whether to take on somebody's life or not, you know? And That's my point of view.
All right. Yeah. Well, I see that you're sticking to it, and we're going to come back to you in just a moment. When we come back, can doctors who commit to saving lives reconcile this pledge with medically assisted dying? We'll tackle this and more after the break. Welcome back. In the last couple of weeks, the Justice Department has decided not to oppose DignitySA's legal call for medical assistance in dying, but the organisation may yet face opposition from medical bodies that believe the right to life is paramount. Let me bring our guests back into the conversation. Prof. Raimondo, is it fair to expect healthcare practitioners who take the Hippocratic Oath to participate in medically assisted dying?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think it's an important one. Firstly, I would say it would be absolutely reasonable. The Hippocratic Oath has been updated in modern forms through the Declaration of Geneva, where the fundamental tenets now are about autonomy and compassion, and we believe that medical assistance in dying is completely in line with those. If you take the original Hippocratic Oath, you had to swear allegiance to a Greek god. You weren't allowed to do surgery. Times have moved on, and our ethical frameworks have moved on, and I think it's absolutely appropriate. And in fact, if you ask doctors in this country, and the South African Medical Association they did a survey of over 1,000 doctors, and 60% of them supported the legalization of medical assistance in dying. So I think there is both the appetite and the framework for us to do this responsibly.
Prof. Gwether, I mean, this is, despite what Prof. Raimondo says, there's also the issue of religious, cultural, there may be secular, ethical issues that caregivers and health practitioners bring to this. In terms of the healthcare workers you are engaging, what are they saying to you about what the solution is?
Well, speaking for the voice of palliative care practitioners and our organisation that is palliative care practitioners, we oppose euthanasia. We recognise that the Hippocratic Oath no longer talks about an exclusion about dying, but the bioethics are not only about autonomy and choice, which I'll speak to in a moment, but also about beneficence and non-maleficence and justice, which means do no harm. And to me, the greatest harm one can do is to kill one's patient. And palliative care supports choice. Palliative care has in-depth discussions with patients and families to find out their fears, their anxieties, their expectations, their preferences. And we also notice that people change their minds, that when we are well and healthy, we think, oh, we wouldn't want to live like that. But even Advocate Strantham Ford, who brought an application to have his life shortened through assisted dying, he, at the end of his life, had the in-depth discussions and the good palliative care that led him to ask both his wife and his palliative care doctor that if the court finds in my favour, do I have to go through with this? Which kind of indicates to me that he was ambivalent about taking this forward and didn't find that the end of his life was as desperate as he had envisaged it. And a lot of people are looking at this, having this choice because of fears of how the end of their lives and their illness will be. Yes. And I think that that's where the medical and nursing profession have to step in to make sure that that people are well cared for and have good quality of life. That's the goal of palliative care, good quality of life for patients and families. And it doesn't mean health, but it means that good quality of life. And you asked about the secular, the spiritual issues and the cultural issues. In South Africa, there's a very strong religious faith in many, many communities, and many communities just would not even consider that euthanasia would be possible. That in many African communities, you can't join the ancestors if you have committed suicide. So people are not going to be supportive of euthanasia in the general South African population.
I mean, I think that's an intriguing argument to put forward, because the societal context matters. But let's get back to the legal one for the moment, Ms. Mbata. You spoke about the right to life, and you said that, you know, it's probably going to be very hard to get the Court to do a U-turn on that. But I look at something like abortion law, for example, and I think to myself, if the Constitutional Court managed to legalize abortion, would it not consider legalizing medically assisted dying?
Remember, with abortion, it's autonomy, right? And in most cases, people they're sound of mind, right?
Yes,
because if you're talking about assisting someone who's already, like for instance, in that in the landmark case of, I think it's Hartman, that the medical doctor that was actually convicted of murder because of literally assisting his father to die, because he saw that his father was struggling with cancer, and it was in a lot of analgesics and all of that. So you see, at that particular point, for an example, the father has no capacity. With abortion at this stage, you know, you have a sort of autonomy to that. Because remember, with abortion also, but I'm going to bring in another topic, there are a lot of consequences to that, you know. Unlike, it's either you retain life or you die. Here you bring in a baby. If you are not financially sound, mentally sound, I mean, I can bring in a lot of factors that affect you as a woman. Right. So I think Professor Raimondo has said that you do have to be of sound mind. That has to be one of the prerequisites for you to be considered for medically assisted dying should the laws be passed. What about autonomy in that situation? If you are of sound mind and you decide that you want to die, and I'm going to put this question to you because I think it's important. Late IFP MP Mario Ambrosini died by suicide, by choice, because, you know, there was no other option as it stands. And his family goes on to say that this choice was not made out of weakness, fear or despair, but from his courage to be the final decision maker concerning his own fate. And one wonders, do people have to resort to taking their own lives violently because the law won't allow them to do that in a dignified manner? But if I may take you back, remember with pregnancy, it's, you know, in law, if you are not born alive, you're not a person, so there's no life involved. Remember that. Okay. That's where the catch is. All right. Here, a person is alive.
What about the example I've given you of a suicide due to the fact that there were no other choices available?
No, I'm still standing by my view, is that, again, it amounts to murder. When you look at elements of murder, right? Unlike with the abortion, as I've said, you are unborn, you don't have a legal personality in South Africa, right? In South African law. So we cannot compare the two, right? So as soon as you're born alive, you have rights. And the state has a prerogative to protect that.
All right. Professor Raimondo, do you not worry this is a slippery slope? Right now you're asking for the right to MAID for physically ill patients, but there are international precedents where this is morphed into people with psychological trauma, PTSD, etc., being euthanized. In a country like ours, you mentioned this, with a traumatic past and a violent present, won't it be a matter of time before we just open the gateway to almost sort of willy-nilly assisted dying?
So, I mean, that's a very legitimate concern and a deeply important one. And I'm going to answer that in just a second. I just want to quickly come back to this, the issue of the right to life, which has come up a lot. And it's very important to distinguish a bodily life, which is a heart beating or breathing, to a life worth living. And in the case that you brought up of Mario Ambrosini, he could have lived a longer, healthier life, or longer life with better quality if he knew at some later point he would have had medical assistance in dying. But he had to shorten his life because it wasn't available, which is why the right to life is one of our arguments. But coming back to the risks or the idea of a slippery slope, and this has come up in many contexts, but now fortunately we have 3 decades worth of experiences of over like 30 jurisdictions that have implemented medical assistance in dying. And we can draw on those experiences. And in fact, in our case, we have 13 foreign experts from 8 different countries. And the evidence is abundantly clear that there is no slippery slope. Every time expansion is increased, it's gone through a measured societal process, either through the legislature or through Parliament. It's not like you open the door and suddenly things change. At each step, it's society making a decision about how they want their end-of-life care and choices to unfold.
Prof, a final word from you, and a very quick one, Prof. Gwither. Do you agree that this does not set a dangerous precedent in terms of what it could mean in the future for those who resort to medically assisted dying?
I think it sets a very dangerous precedent. And in Canada, the past president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association says, no, it's not a slippery slope, it's a runaway train. That 1/5 of the deaths in Canada now are due to assisted dying. And that is very much a risk in South Africa. Prof. Dan Nkayana wrote in the South African Medical Journal that there's a very real risk of euthanasia becoming a substitute for proper care. And I think we have got the only safeguard currently in South Africa is not to legalize assisted dying.
All right. Thank you all so much for your fascinating insights. I could keep talking to you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you very much to our guests for their insights into that, Professor Raymado, Professor Gwither and Ms. Mbata. Now, every week we bring you a new fact about the law. Did you know that even though the Constitution provides for the respect of a patient's decision and choice not to have their autonomy violated, Section 36 limits that autonomy if legally required and duly justified. And Section 7 of the National Health Act 61 of 2003 that deals with consent sets out that framework for limitation. The Act says a health service may not be provided to a user without their informed consent unless the provision of a health service without informed consent is authorized in terms of any law or a court order. Failure to treat the user or a group of people, which includes the user, will result in a serious risk to public health, or any delay in the provision of the health service to the user might result in his or her death or irreversible damage to his or her health. But a healthcare provider must take all reasonable steps to obtain the user's informed consent.